Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming out to this session on Azure IaaS and Azure Stack. My name is Tabriz Mohammed, and I'm a PM in the Azure Compute team. And this is Mahesh.
Hey guys, I'm Mahesh Tyagarajan. I'm a program manager in the Azure Compute team, focusing on bringing the virtual machine experiences on Azure.
Right. And we work together. I'm on the UI side of things, and he's on the back-end side of things, and we work together, and we bring the Azure IaaS experiences for you guys. So just to kind of introduce this, and you guys may be a little confused that the session name changed. It was originally Azure IaaS for Azure Pack before we announced Stack, and now it's for Azure Stack. And so if you guys were here for a session that was entirely about Pack, this is going to be mostly focused on Stack. We will talk about Pack just a little bit, but mostly on Azure Stack and about Azure IaaS experiences in public Azure that are coming on premises. So we're going to start with, if you guys have not watched the keynote or looked at Twitter or opened your eyes during Ignite at all, what Azure Stack is. And then we're going to just start going into IaaS. And just in case you guys have not heard that term before, IaaS is infrastructure as a service. It encompasses virtual machines, storage, network, and compute. So we're going to go through some basics about how IaaS and that model works in Azure. And then we're going to start to get a little bit deeper into it, look at some more complex deployments, some more complex concepts, and demos sprinkled in between those two sections. And then once you guys kind of know how this stuff works, we'll send you some resources, how you can get started using Azure Stack today. I know that sounds tricky, but you'll see what that means in a second. And some resources for learning more about Azure Stack, more about public Azure. So to get started, what is Azure Stack? And so you guys have probably seen this slide before. I ripped it from somebody who's much better at making slides than myself. And on the right side, we have Microsoft Azure, what Mahesh and I work on all the time. And we've been hammering away at this for a couple years now, trying to make our IaaS stack the best in the industry. And Windows Server, Linux, both running on top of our IaaS and PaaS services being Service Fabric, which we announced last week at Build, running on top of our top of industry cloud infrastructure for compute, network, and storage. And of course, Azure Stack is taking the best of what we've learned about running a service at hyperscale, absolutely massive scale, and bringing that back into your on-premises data centers so that you can take the best of our entire stack, to reuse that term, and run it on your fabric in your terms with your control. And so this diagram is obviously mine, and this one is a little bit deeper into what that stack looks like. This is a level 300 session. And in the portal part of things, which is this top piece, you have the portal is comprised of what we call extensions. And the reason that this is important is everything that exists in the portal is absolutely extensible. There's actually very little of the portal that's core, and even the most important experiences that we have in there I'd like to think that they're most important because I own them, for VMs and virtual networks and storage are actually on the same level as every single other extension in the portal. The smallest extensions that we have with very minimal experiences to the biggest and most important extensions that we have. And then moving one step further down, we have our API layer, which you guys have heard the term Azure Resource Manager. We're going to talk about that a little bit here as well. That is fully extensible. And the same thing as the portal, is every single resource provider that plugs into Azure Resource Manager is on the same level. There's no special privileged resource providers, which is fantastic if you're thinking about extensibility and third parties contributing to this ecosystem like they're already doing today in public Azure. And as a small piece of our API surface, we also have the gallery or the marketplace, and we'll talk about that a little bit later today as well. And then the next level down is, of course, the big bang about Azure Stack, is we run our own fabric at massive scale today in public Azure, with our own infrastructure, but Azure Stack is coming and running on your fabric. So this Azure Stack includes the user experience and the API, all the learnings we have in that space, but running on your fabric based on Windows Server. So just to take a look at the Azure portal, if you guys haven't seen it, it's been out for a couple months now. Well, actually over a year now. We launched it at Build last year, constantly iterating and improving it. The biggest thing that we like to tell other people about the portal today is that it is DevOps focused. You guys see these things called parts and blades, and everything is focused around customization and making great dashboards so you know what's going on with your application at any point in time. It's scalable, much better than the old portal in this regard. It's much easier to get tons and tons of partners and extensions loaded in the portal without it getting too cluttered. It's very easy to extend that portal. We talked about portal extensions. That same contribution model that we use today in public Azure will be on premises so that you can add your own custom extensions to extend the UI. And in the Azure Pack portal, for those of you who are using it, there was a separate interface for your admin and your tenant experiences, two different portals. In Azure Stack, they're going to be in the same portal. Using that extensibility model, you'll be able to have your admin, your fabric scenarios surfaced along with your tenant scenarios in the same portal without needing to figure out which one to go to. Azure Resource Manager is that next step down, so we're just going to take a look at it here. It's comprised of all these concepts that if you guys have been paying attention to for the past couple of months, you would know that it's comprised around resource groups. Resource groups are that fundamental building block where everything inside of Azure is deployed, whether it's a virtual machine, whether it's an IP address, whether it's a storage account, an app service. Everything must be deployed in resource groups, and we'll talk about the semantics and how those behave a little bit later. Templates. This is what you use to create these resource groups, or to create the resources inside these resource groups. Tagging, role-based access control, you get these for free. They're fundamental concepts of Azure Resource Manager. In fact, in public Azure today, we don't do anything special from the resource providers up to override or provide custom behavior for tagging and RBAC. It's all handled by Azure Resource Manager, as well as auditing or events. So you can see what's going on with your deployments over time. You can see changes that were made, updates, deletions, additions. All of that is provided by Azure Resource Manager, not implemented by the resource providers, which means when those third parties extend the Azure platform, they get all of that for free. Monitoring is going to be consistent with PowerShell, CLI, and REST clients on top, communicating with Azure Resource Manager. Those clients that we use today in public Azure will be the exact same clients you can use with Azure Stack. The same PowerShell command list, you just switch to your environment, and we'll show you how we do that a little bit later. And we have the concept of resource groups and resources within those resource groups being able to span multiple regions. So resources inside of a resource group that may be in West US, the resources inside of those could be anywhere around the world. So if your application, you want to think about your application globally, you can construct that without needing to construct resource groups all over the place. And to call out on the right side of this, for an identity perspective, we do integrate with Azure Active Directory, and then when this comes on premises, you'll be able to integrate with ADFS as well. Azure Marketplace. So Gallery Marketplace, we use these terms interchangeably. Again, it's all about consistency. This entire message with Azure Stack is that you get the Azure Marketplace in the public portal. That same infrastructure, that same experience will be available in Azure Stack. So if you build something, a template with your extensions, and we'll talk about all these building blocks, for public Azure, you take that same template, that same code, and you deploy it on Azure Stack without any changes, which is great, again, for extensibility for those first and third party publishers who are providing content to public Azure. That content will work seamlessly on premises as well. And this slide just to highlight that kind of the verticals that we have in Azure Stack around compute, network, storage, and security, that all of this is built on top of Windows Server, Hyper-V, and System Center. You will be able to use System Center just like you're using Azure with Azure Pack today to manage that infrastructure going forward. But System Center with VMM won't be used in the provisioning flow because obviously in Azure we don't use VMM right now for the provisioning flow, but OMS and System Center you'll be able to use them both for Azure Pack and Azure Stack to manage your infrastructure like many of you are probably doing today. And Azure IaaS, the basics. So let's get started with kind of learning some of the concepts around Azure Stack. And Mahesh is going to take over.
All right. Thanks, Tobias. So I think that was a good overview of how we're bringing the Azure cloud into your own data center, right? The rate at which we operate in terms of hyperscale, we're bringing that scalability, the ability where the management platform, which is honed to go handle millions of requests per hour, per minute, right? We're bringing that to your data center. It's the same plane, same code. It's going to handle that request if you generate them in your data center, right? With that, what I want to do is just kind of talk a little bit more about the basics, go a little bit in detail, because these are some constructs that has not been introduced to you guys. So we will spend a couple of minutes just talking about them at a very high level. So the first concept is a resource group. Tobias gave a brief introduction about them. Think of resource group as a logical container that allows you to put a certain set of resources together to manage them in an easy fashion. A good example would be, you could think of, let's take a SharePoint form, right? There are scenarios around SharePoint form where you're just doing some dev and test, you want to generate a load testing app and things like that, which the life cycle of the resource or that application is very short-lived. You want to deploy the app, do some testing, delete it, right? For those scenarios, we kind of think about putting them in a single resource group and then deleting them, because what resource groups offer is the capability where you can manage the entire entity as a whole. Previously, if you had to deploy a 9 VM SharePoint form and you wanted to go delete it, you'd have to go individually to each single VM, make sure, okay, delete this VM, delete this VM. You have to write a PowerShell script to go be able to delete that. Or what the platform offers now is the capability where you can deal with all those resources that are in the resource group as a single entity. So you get a single management operation to go delete that whole thing as an entity. Now, the second part about the resource groups is you don't have to place them, all the resources or the app in an entire resource group. You can think of slicing and dicing them based on their life cycle. So if you think about a SQL database, the life cycle of a SQL database or a SQL server running on a virtual machine is longer than any other app. So you could think of placing the SQL databases and all of those database entities in a separate resource group. You can place all your networking constructs in a separate resource group, and it gives you that flexibility of architecting the application the way you want in how you're going to interact with it from a management standpoint. The reason I say that is we have two additional capabilities that we're bringing onto the platform. One is called role-based access control, and we'll be doing a deep dive of role-based access control with some pretty cool demos. I'm not going to go through that, but at a high level, the ability to do resource access management. How do you make sure that user A or user B cannot touch or change my networking configuration in my subscription? Having that control can actually be expressed at the resource group level. So let's say you have 10 virtual networks or a lot of NICs with the right set of configuration with the firewall configured and the security groups configured. You can go express the resource access management policy at the resource group level instead of going to every single entity and configuring it. So it reduces the amount of time and the complexity for managing these entities. So role-based access control or resource access management is a key part of architecting your application using this. The last piece there is around tagging. It's the basic capability where when you configure a tag on a resource or a resource group, it propagates through and actually shows up in your bill. So you'd be able to do better cost management using that. And we'll be doing a deep dive and showing you some samples of how this would look like. So when you think about resource groups, keep all of these different things in mind. What is the life cycle of the resources that I'm packing into a resource group? What am I doing with resource access management? How do I do billing? All of these things go together to allow you to construct this. One other key part about the platform in general is that we will also introduce capabilities where you can move resources between resource groups. So it gives you the flexibility where even if you made a mistake, you can actually go merge them together. And the last one here that I do want to touch on is, in some cases, given we are giving you the power to handle or manage the resources as a whole, where like there are 10 VMs and some user who has a privilege can go accidentally delete the resource group and everything goes away. So we have some inbuilt capabilities in the platform for you to be able to go lock some entities down. You can actually go say lock a particular storage account or lock a database. So it ensures that even if somebody comes in and accidentally tries to delete the resource group, it protects you from making sure that those entities don't go away. So we provide all of those different controls and platform on the public Azure cloud, and what we're doing is we're bringing all of that into your own data center as well. Okay. So we briefly touched on this concept, right? At the top, what you're seeing here is an app that uses some of the app services like websites and SQL databases with a virtual machine and a storage account. You could choose to place them together, or you could choose to place them in different resource groups based on the life cycle of the resource. So always think about the life cycle, the management story, the resource access management before you architect your applications using the new model. Okay, now, so we briefly touched on templates. We talked about the capabilities that it brings in how when you go ahead and build a template out for an application like a SharePoint form or a simple web app or even AD, right? That template that we are building, that you build, will actually be consistent. So all that you have to do is if you have a PowerShell script that says, oh, go deploy to the Azure environment, you can just change your environment and say, deploy the same template to your on-premise environment. So if you actually go do AD on deploying AD-DC on a virtual machine in a HA fashion, you can do the same on-premise. And if you are doing a lot of this on-premises today, you go build these templates out for on-premises, it gives you the flexibility where all the configuration of the collateral that you built today for your data center can be moved to Azure in a seamless fashion, because this template model is going to be consistent between your data center and Azure. Now, in terms of the templates themselves, templates are nothing but a declarative model that allows you to describe your application in a single template file. And we provide a lot of language capabilities to simplify this, but it is very declarative. The second part about the templates are that they are idempotent. So don't just think of template files as the capability for you to go deploy an application. You can also use the same template file for modifying, or for updating, for upgrading your environment, because you can use the same template file and the platform is actually idempotent to detect that, oh, the first 10 VMs that you actually have deployed earlier is already there. So if you ask for 2 more VMs, we'll detect that and only deploy the next 2 VMs. So and we'll be showing some samples of how to do that and how this actually works in the public cloud today and how it's going to come back into your data center. And it is a consistent deployment. We talked about it. In terms of the JSON file or the template files itself, it's a new construct. You have, you're looking at JSON. We're so used to PowerShell scripts before. I wouldn't be too surprised or worried about it, because if you think about, hey, I'm going to go do new Azure VM, and then you're like, type the VM name. What is the size of the VM? What are the username and password for the VM? You deploy this in a flat line, right? You do this in your script. The JSON file, what we're seeing here is nothing but just a different format of it. You're just saying the same definition of a virtual machine is expressed in a format of JSON. All that we do, and we'll be showing some samples, you'd be just doing the same thing of accepting a parameter, passing it into the file, and that's all we'll be doing. So the JSON files are not drastically different, except that it's a slightly different model, but it's the same way in which you go deploy these files. And we view these files as your own files, your deployment files, your app files. So go place them in the same place where you would place your normal scripts in, right? And for the secure information that you pass into these template files, just store them like how you would. Like where would you store your password for the user, username and password for your VMs? It's exactly similar. So there isn't any different than what you would do in a PowerShell script. Another key part about this is the consistency that we're talking about. We're not talking about only at the template language model. We're talking about it even from the PowerShell commandlets that you use to create a VM. Today, if you go do new Azure VM or new VM in your on-premises world, those commandlets are also going to be consistent. So you don't have to just use the template files to achieve the consistency. If you go author a PowerShell script which uses like custom logic and spins up a VM, spins up a virtual network and connects them, even the PowerShell script that you author code to go do in a data center using this model will be consistent in both stacks. So it's not just the templates. Keep that in mind. And the templates themselves are parameterized, and we'll show some samples of how they're parameterized, but they're parameterized so it allows you to do repeatable deployments. So if you have multiple environments where you're spinning the same thing up again and again, today you'd author a massive script that you'd run again and again. But here you have this template file that takes care of all of the orchestration and the dependencies, so you can use the same template file, pass in different parameters, deploy it in your different environments like dev or test, pre-production, production. So the repeatable aspect of the templates makes it very easy for you to maintain and also share code. Okay. Now, we talked about templates. Let me give you a brief introduction about how the new model does compute, network, and storage on Azure. Before I go deep in, I just wanted to get a quick hand check of how many people have used Azure before. Whoa. All right, that's good. So you guys are going to be very familiar with this. So at a high level, what we do is we introduced the compute network and storage platform under Azure Resource Manager, right? And with this introduction, one of the key focal points of our thought process here was to make sure we give you guys the building blocks of the infrastructure as a service component. We do the building blocks and make sure that these building blocks are so relevant for customers who actually use them in Azure Stack as well. So that's kind of the key goal here. So at a high level, what we do in compute is, obviously offer virtual machines, right? The second aspect is the availability set construct that allows you to build place these virtual machines together to tell the platform that maintain high availability, maintain the same SLA. So we kind of go and do that. From a networking standpoint, we've made drastic improvements in our networking constructs that we've introduced in Azure. It used to be implicit. A lot of the resources and constructs that we used to have in Azure was implicit. But with this new model that we're introducing under Azure Resource Manager, we've fundamentally broken the networking constructs down, went into giving you virtual networks and floating network interfaces, which contains MAC addresses. We've given you the public IP addresses, which can be taken and attached either to a load balancer or to a network interface directly, so you can actually access the VM or place the VM on the internet if you want. We have brought in the network security groups. These constructs existed before, but we've brought them on to be able to do both at a subnet level ACLing, where you can put it on a virtual network, or you can apply it directly on a network interface as well. And load balancers as well. The two things that we've listed here, and this is our strategy going forward, the VPN gateways and express route circuits are not available in public Azure yet, but the consistent aspect of it is that we want to drive home the point that the gateway constructs that we build on Azure is going to be consistent with on-premise too, right? And from a storage standpoint, I think we're very, very excited. It was one of the top asks in user-wise for Azure Stack to actually bring the blob table storage support in Azure Pack. So we've gone ahead and brought that with the new Azure Stack environment. So in your data center, you can start doing these operations around blobs and tables as well. All right, with that, I'm going to go hand it off to Tabrez to go do a quick demo.
Switch over here. All right. So we were starting with talking about templates, and we're just going to look at all the concepts that he was discussing earlier and take a deeper look at them right now. So just starting at the top of this file, we won't look through every single line of JSON here, but just to explain some of the concepts. We do use JSON schema so that intelligent clients can look at the schema definition at the top of the template file and figure out what the actual schema is for the rest of the template. And resources can contribute to that schema to expand it so that intelligent clients can do things like IntelliSense and autocomplete so that the author of such a template doesn't need to remember every single property name for an ARM template, for Azure Resource Manager template. They're versioned, of course, and we have this parameter section. And I want to just talk very quickly about the structure of the parameter section. You see here that it's simply just an array or a collection of these objects. Each one of these objects has a name. This is the parameter name. So when you go to deploy one of these templates, you'll be passing in values against this name. In this case, the new storage account name that you want when you instantiate this template. Each parameter has a type. And type here can be a string. It could be secret string, a secure string. Secure string is an example of when you have a password. And what we do when we see secure string is we don't persist it anywhere in the platform, and you never see it back when you get the deployment history. We talked about auditing and Azure Resource Manager storing these deployment history. You won't see these secrets back out on the other side, whereas you will for strings. You will be able to see what was passed in when this template was instantiated. So we will give you that flexibility. And again, this is in public Azure today, and you will get this with Azure Stack. Whoa, your touchpad. So to scroll back up here, we have also the concepts of default values and allowed values for parameters. Again, for intelligent clients, and including PowerShell, you'll be able to have an allowed value so that you'll be able to autocomplete something where the template author we'll be able to restrict the set of allowed values that can actually be passed in for this parameter. This validation will happen before the template even begins running. In this case, you have the allowed OS versions for Windows. In public Azure, we commonly see people maybe limit a template so that it only can be deployed in a certain set of regions. So you will have like allowed values we only want in the US, of West US, East US, North Central, South Central, so on and so forth. And then the default value, again, for intelligent clients, this will automatically be populated that you don't need to specify this parameter and to automatically pick up this value at provisioning time. And last thing for a parameter is they have the concept of description, and we have clients that are picking up on description so that someone consuming this template doesn't need to go to some ancillary documentation to figure out what this parameter value is for. You can put in the description right there and have it show up. So variables, and I know sometimes these terms are interchanged in programming languages, but variables are different in templates than the parameters. So parameters are coming in, the caller will pass these values in. Variables are static inside of the template. That being said, you'll see some syntax where you'll have brackets like this and a particular function name. And what you can do with this is actually compose values for these variables based on parameters that are coming in and the environment that the template is running in. In this case, you have the resource ID, so you don't need to specify the full string. Azure Resource Manager will concat this string automatically for you. The next section inside of a resource, inside of a template, is the resources array. And you'll see that each of these has a similar shape. They have a type, they have a name, API version, location, and a properties block. And like Mahesh said before, this isn't a special language that is only found inside of the template. The structure of a type, for example, is actually a substring of the URL you would use if you wanted to go directly against the API and create a storage account. So all this is really doing is expanding out each of these strings, and Resource Manager, its execution engine, just makes put calls over HTTP to each of the resource providers underneath. This is why it's so extensible and declarative, but also very simple to get started with. If you have API documentation, you don't need extra documentation to be able to write a template, because all the things that you're going to put in here, like the type and the properties, are what goes inside of the request if you weren't using a template to create these resources. And the last thing that I want to touch on, if we can find an example of it here, is for a network interface. So creating a network interface, if you remember the model that he showed earlier, before you could create a network interface, in this case for this template, we want to be able to put it into a particular virtual network. So we have this semantic called depends on. And what that does is it automatically defines the orchestration sequence that this template will be run. And so the execution engine will not create this particular network interface with this name until the virtual network has been created. And you can construct very complex deployments with this mechanic, that if you have a particular resource that's going to rendezvous on potentially 10 other things, you just have 10 depends on sequences here, and that's it, and Azure Resource Manager figures that out automatically for you. So we're going to jump into an example of what it looks like to, oh, sorry, one other thing. You'll need to connect that again. And a parameters file. So we have two ways, if you remember the parameters at the top of the template, that you can actually instantiate these templates. You can go ahead and pass in parameters when you're calling the template outside, and like if you're calling it through PowerShell, you will simply just be passing these, you know, a dash and then the parameter name and then the value, dash, parameter name and then the value. Or you can actually supply, when you're provisioning the template, the parameters as a file, so all the values are straight in there, and you take your template, you take your parameters file, and you don't need to pass any parameters over the command line interface. Oh, did the internet just die?
Yeah.
See if we can get this back up and running. Fingers crossed. Cool. There we go. Awesome. Right. Okay, so let's hop into an example of what this will look like from PowerShell. So again, to start with, remember that all the resources in this Azure Resource Manager world, they all need to be provisioned inside of resource groups. So before you can create a deployment, you first need to create a resource group, and that is pretty straightforward. new Azure resource group. And again, the PowerShell commandlets I'm using here right now are available. We're calling against public Azure. They're the same PowerShell commandlets you'll be able to use when you're calling against Azure Stack. And I'll show you how easy it is to switch between environments when we do this demo against Azure Stack. So new Azure resource group, I'm going to give it a name, test 15. And I'm going to put it in the location, West US. And go ahead and have that run. And you can see that there's verbose output running over PowerShell of the action that's going against Resource Manager and the response that comes back. And now that I have a resource group, I can go ahead and create a deployment against it, resource group deployment. And I have to give it a name. I'm just going to call it deploy1 in this case. Give the resource group name of the guy I just created. The template file. So this was, if you remember from the Visual Studio Code interface, this is where the full template is. And then you can go ahead, in this particular example, we have all the parameters specified in the file. Rather than specifying on this call, I can just pass in the file. Ooh. Where is it?
You just need to go in front of the template file.
Where is it?
Go here. Go in front.
Okay. Let's go back here. Should we just...
Yep.
There we go. Parameters and template file. Great. So we're going to go ahead and run this deployment, and this is running against the resource group that we just created. And you can see the verbose output. Now remember, this is going to go create a ton of resources. If you saw how long the template was, you see as they start provisioning that you get the status, rich status information in PowerShell as it's running. You'll see as these steps complete, you'll get more verbose output. We'll switch back to this interface right after we do this demo inside of Azure Stack. We need to connect to RDP again. Yes, internet back up.
Cool. I think the VM is now transition. It's about to, it's starting to run. Yeah, I think the interesting part that you saw there was like when we showed the dependencies, you saw that the dependencies got resolved as the network interfaces was created. So the VM was not even created until the corresponding storage account where the disks are going to be placed and the network interface was ready. So the orchestration of the infrastructure now can be specified right inside the template file. And just deploying them would take care of deploying all these dependencies as well. And we'll show some complex examples.
Exactly, yeah. So this is actually, I've RDP'd into an environment that has access to an Azure Stack environment. And if you guys have used the PowerShell commands before, you'll know this call, get Azure environment. And maybe you guys haven't used it before because you've only been running against public Azure environments. And what comes out of the box with this commandlet is our public cloud and also our public cloud in China, which you see here, these first two environments. And of course, again, because of consistency between public Azure and Azure Stack, the Azure Stack environment just shows up like another normal environment. It's this exact same thing like public Azure and Azure in China. So we're going to go ahead and use the exact same commandlets here. New Azure resource group, going to give it a name. And I'm going to give it a location. In this case, you know if you've been using Azure that we have locations like West US, East US. We don't have a location like Chicago. But in this particular stamp of Azure Stack, we have created a location called Chicago. So we're going to go ahead and run that here. Create a resource group. And after this resource group gets created, we're going to go ahead and create a resource group deployment. And the same exact commandlets we're going to call here with the same parameters. Going to go ahead and give it the resource group that I just created. Going to give it a parameter file. Oh, actually, let me show you. I talked about the two examples of how you can specify parameters. In this example, we've taken that template, we've actually embedded the parameters straight into the template file. So I won't be specifying a parameter file. because the parameters and those values are already embedded inside the template. So you guys have the flexibility depending on whether this is a template that you're using for setting up production environments or repeatable environments where you don't want to embed those parameters, perhaps they're secrets, inside of the file, or if you want to give developers something super simple that they can just click and run, and just keep running the template and not specify anything at all, you can embed those parameters straight in the file. In this particular example, we've done that. We've embedded the template straight in here. So I'm just going to go ahead and specify the template file inside of this folder and Azure deploy.json. And that's going to go ahead and run the same commandlet, same expected output, and you'll be able to see this deployment come up. If we switch over to the Azure environment that is looking at this guy, we're going to go ahead and refresh it. And this is the same portal as the same bits, the same everything about it as what we're running in public Azure. It's why it looks so similar. Hopefully when this refreshes, we'll go ahead and take a look at the resource group that's provisioning. How many of you guys have actually used the new portal for public Azure? Okay, all right, that's pretty good. And how many of you guys have not used it because you're using resources that aren't available in the new portal yet? Okay, all right, that's interesting. Just to give a call out, we do have some people from the portal team. We know you guys have tons of feedback about the new portal. They have a booth where two guys have been standing there relentlessly since Monday. They've been doing nothing else except booth duty. So definitely stop by and see Michael and Sean from the portal team. If you guys have feedback, they'd love to hear it. They're just waiting for people to stop by and tell them about what you guys like or don't like about the new Azure portal. So now that I've created that resource group, we'll hop into the resource groups for this view. And it's also great. So you see I created this resource group, Tabriz mtest 20, and it went ahead and created these 10 resources that the template defined. You can see some of these haven't fully provisioned yet. This is the same interface, same navigation model. You see resource group blade here. You'll see the resource group blade in another demo that we do later of how these resources are coming up. And you can also see from Azure Resource Manager's perspective of what it provides out of the box. You see that you're going to get your events and your alerts, this exact same interface underneath, exact same UI that we write for public Azure in Azure Stack working against Azure Resource Manager. With that, we'll go ahead and hand it back to Mahesh to talk about some advancements in the new IaaS model.
All right. Cool. Now that I know majority of you folks are actually are using Azure, so let me talk a little bit about some of the key advancements that we have made that would probably make sense, right? The ability to build an app from a single-click deploy model, right? Be it SharePoint or AD or any of those things. That's one of the key improvements that we've made by integrating the compute, network, and storage stack under Azure Resource Manager. So all the capabilities around how you go architect a template to be able to do single-click, repeatable deployments is what you're getting. So that's the Resource Manager support. And as we are doing the Resource Manager support, you get the RBAC, tagging, and all those rich capabilities. Now, the next thing is the decoupled network model. As I mentioned earlier, it was used to be so tightly coupled with the cloud services and how you place the virtual machines in them. The networking configuration was part of the VM. All of that moves away. We give you a clear separation of what you're doing with networking, how do you control networking, and how do you go set up policies and resource access management on networking using RBAC capabilities. We've reduced the locking semantics. So for folks who've used Azure for scalable deployments, you used to have, you run into problems around how you cannot add two VMs in parallel into a cloud service and things like that. That has been fundamentally removed from the stack. So now I'll be showing a demo quickly about how you can go deploy scalable deployments in Azure going forward. And we've also enhanced some of the key compute capabilities, specifically around how you want to run cluster-based workloads. If you want to do a SQL Server always on Azure, and how you physically place them in 3 different racks, right? That was a capability that did not exist. We always gave you the flexibility of only placing them in 2 fault domains, but we've also added the capability in this new model with the capability to go place 3 fault domains, for these cluster-based workloads. So it actually makes it better and provides you higher availability. And storage, right? We've added the support for, had the support in Azure for a while. It continues to be there on Azure. Now the key part is that we're bringing this back into your data center. All right. So let's go see the next next thing is, let me switch back to a demo. Let me do a quick scale demo for you guys right here. Cool. So now what you guys are doing, what you're looking at is a template file, looking at it from a Visual Studio standpoint. We've intentionally kind of brought it up here because there are some few capabilities that allows you to visualize such a complicated template in an easy fashion. If you look at it closely, there's a JSON outline on the left. And if I zoom back in, what you're seeing is the JSON outline of what are the parameters, what are the resources that are being spun up in this. So it gives you a rich view of what's happening. But it is not necessary that you have to use Visual Studio. All that Visual Studio offers to you is two capabilities. One, it gives you the flexibility of viewing the JSON outline in an easy fashion. It gives you the capability of IntelliSense. Remember, we talked about schemas. So when you actually edit something wrongly or you build your JSON file and you're making mistakes, Visual Studio will give you an error right below, which is a squiggly line that will tell you you're making a mistake during the authoring of the template. The additional capability is that we also have the capability to go add resources directly into a template file. So if you go navigate back up here and say plus, we have rich integration for all of these resources right here. So if you want to add another VM, all that you have to do is drag that VM and drop it back in. It'll add all of the virtual machine constructs directly into the template file. So you are looking at not editing every single line of the virtual machine template, but you're directly adding these resources, dropping them in from a Visual Studio standpoint. But you don't have to do that, but it is another option for you to go play with them. Now, in this template, what we're trying to do is I have this template deployed already in a resource group. It has deployed a couple of virtual machines. What I'm going to show you with this template model is the idempotency aspect of it, where you can reuse the same template file and scale an environment out, and additional capabilities in the language that allows you to do scalable deployments. So let's look at the first thing here, which is, if you look at it, I'm accepting a parameter called number of instances. And I'm going to use this number of instances parameter to kind of repeatably or increase the number of VMs that I'm creating in this particular resource group. So for example, I've accepted 2 here. Let me go navigate down into the network interfaces section first. We have this capability in the Azure Resource Manager where you can go use the function called as copy. If you look at this closely, you have the copy and copy index. What this does is, this parameter value being passed in, if you look at its parameters, the number of instances, when you specify this number to be 40, for example, this template file can actually take it, go deploy 40 instances for you. No more do you have to write a PowerShell wrapper that would go look at, hey, do I have VM1? Oh, don't create it because you have to handle the exception. Not that anymore. The template file is idempotent. So if you actually go specify 40 here right now, it is going to automatically take care of, oh, VMs 1 and 2 are ready to go. I'm just going to start creating from VM3 to VM40. So that capability is what we're looking at. And let me go switch back. And I'll show you the parameters file quickly. We're going to switch this back up to 40 and deploy. Before I go ahead and deploy, I want to give you guys a quick view of what's there in this particular resource group. So we're going to go deploy or scale out in this particular resource group. If you see that there's actually a couple of VMs there, my VM0 and my VM1. We're going to scale this environment up in a single click from 2 VMs up to 40. That's what we're going to do. Let's go back out. Let's go to deployment scripts. Right here. The same commands, again, new Azure resource group deployment, give it a deployment name. I'm picking the same resource group name. I need to pass in the template parameters file. This path. Take the actual template file. To the template file. There you go. That was a mistake in. Yep. Go back. There you go. So once again, we post this template back up to Azure Resource Manager. It's going to quickly check if the template is valid, and it started creating the deployment. Now what you'll see is it's a failure. All right. think I know what the issue is.
We talked about the rich output, by the way, that you get from Azure Resource Manager.
Right.
Don't need to dig into any log files. You see this right on PowerShell. And the same thing inside of Visual Studio if you're doing your deployments from Visual Studio in the output console where you'd see like compilation errors and debug errors.
Right. Make sure this is all set to go. I know why it's failed.
And something that I forgot to touch on earlier when we were talking about Azure Stack coming on premises. I've been working at the Azure Stack booth duty for most of the week. And a common, I guess, misconception that I want to touch on so everyone in this audience is aware, that the advancements in Azure Stack coming from Azure back into on-premises are definitely built on Windows Server 2016. But that doesn't mean that you can only run Windows Server 2016 VMs on your Fabric for Azure Stack. You can run VMs back all the way to 2008, like Hyper-V supports today, like Azure supports today as well. So it's not new everywhere. Sure, the Azure Stack is new, but your existing workloads, your existing virtual machines will definitely be able to run on Azure Stack.
Cool. Yeah, so I actually copied the wrong template file. That's why it failed. But now that it's up and running, what you're seeing is that I use the same template file that I used to go ahead and deploy for those two VMs, and I just scaled it up to 40, and it is just provisioning all of them, and it'll just take care of all the dependencies that I've defined in the template to make sure that I have to wait for NIC 5 for VM5 to come up. So it'll actually do all the dependency matching, make sure that the resources that are required are up and running before I go spin up the next set of resources. Now, while this is running, what I want to do is go back up to the portal where I showed you the scalable tier, and I'm going to just go reload it. And you can see we saw about 9 resources, and in less than just a few minutes, what you're seeing is the entire set of resources are actually starting to spin up. We have the whole deployment going, scaling up with a single click, with a single change in a template file. You have the whole scalable Azure Stack being available. Now, what you're getting is this scalable Azure Stack in a single click, which scales out, is coming into your own data center. Right? Cool.
And when you think about services that exist in Azure today, like Autoscale, I mean, they'll build on top of these concepts so that you can do it manually, invoke it in your own scripts, your own monitoring infrastructure, or if you're using Azure, you'll get the same functionality out of the box.
Yep. Switch back out. All right. Now, actually, to the good stuff, right? Some of the improvements and advancements going forward. Given most of you folks have used Azure for a while, let's talk a little bit about the virtual machine building blocks. The first thing is about images, right? One of the more common scenarios where you actually go prep a golden image, kind of reuse them again and again because it's a common environment. We support that. And in terms of the images that are available in the platform, we have a set of platform images that we bring into the stack. The first one is we obviously support. We want to make sure that we are the best cloud for running any Microsoft application out there. So we will make sure that SQL team or Exchange team or Dynamics, all of those teams, we work directly with them to make sure they work with us to publish their first-party images into the platform. So we make it the best cloud for running Microsoft apps. We also partner a lot with the Linux community. We have a VM Depot. For folks who don't know, we actually have VM Depot where community images can be published into the platform. We also have first-class support for IBM and Oracle and Ubuntu and CentOS, and a lot of the Linux SKUs are available in the platform. And with this, we've also introduced, for folks who are not aware, we have the marketplace. With marketplace, what we've done is we've brought a lot of the first and third-party apps into the service, and they can be available in 2 forms. So you can actually have your own license. For example, we have Barracuda or Commvault or all of the different third-party marketplace images, and you can have them in either hourly billing model or bring your own license model. So we have different images in different models, and you should go check out the marketplace for that. Another key part of the platform is around how we've introduced the extensions model. How many of you know about the virtual machine extensions capability in Azure? Okay, very few folks. So I'll spend a minute talking about what extensions are. So think of extensions as the capability that allows you to do in-VM configuration, right? When you spin up infrastructure, all that you do is you get virtual machines, but virtual machines themselves being there, it's not very helpful. So extensions bring the capability of configuring the box and making sure the app is installed and ready to go. And we have partnered with a lot of different in-VM configuration providers. We have support, first-class support for desired state configurator, DSC. We have support for Chef. You can run your Chef recipes inside the box. You have support for Puppet for folks who use Puppet. You can actually put the Puppet agent inside the box and run Puppet scripts as well. And we also have support for custom scripts. So any script that you author today, a PowerShell script that you use to go run inside the box and set up a machine, you can use the same PowerShell script to run it on the cloud. So these capabilities come, and you can actually express dependencies as well between this. And we'll show some samples of how we use the dependencies between scripts in the SharePoint example. We also have other types of extensions like security extensions. So we have Trend Micro, IaaS anti-malware extensions. So you can drop any of the McAfee or Trend Micro extensions into the platform. So securing your VMs on the cloud is now much easier. So you can actually go drop them as well. It's a funny picture. We actually drew it on a whiteboard to get it up here. So we have some high-performance features on the cloud. We offer the biggest VM on the cloud, and we call them the G-Series VM. For trademark reasons, I just have a picture here, but you can decipher what I mean. But I think it's the largest VM on the cloud. It offers up to 32 cores and 448 GB of RAM capability. And we recently announced, like 2 weeks ago, general availability of premium storage on the cloud. So with this, we announced premium storage support, which makes it easy for running, low latency, high bandwidth network applications. So we offer up to 32 terabytes of storage per VM. We can boost up to 64,000 IOPS per virtual machine. Right? Earlier, it used to be on the order of 8,000 IOPS because of the standard storage model. Now we've gone up to 64,000 IOPS per VM, which makes it very easy for running large-scale workloads, and up to 50,000 IOPS per disk as well. Now, in terms of security, we've always thought about bringing, making it even better going forward. How many of you know about the Azure Key Vault support that was added? Very little. Okay, so Azure Key Vault is a new service that came online in less than 3 months ago. They are in a public preview right now. Azure Key Vault offers you the capability to bring, it offers two models. It allows you the capability to bring your keys or your certificates into the Azure service in a seamless fashion. You can go ahead and push those certificates or keys into the platform, and they provide the capability where the compute service and the Azure Key Vault service actually interact at the back end to make sure that if you want to go fetch a key or say that, hey, I have placed a certificate in my Key Vault, you can reference that certificate in your virtual machine, and we'll take care of pushing or bringing the certificate inside your box in a very secure fashion. And they operate in a couple of models. One is a software-based model where you can just upload a certificate. They actually secure it in a software-based model. We also support the capability where it can actually be backed by a hardware security module. So we also have HSM support. So if you buy a premium Azure Key Vault, you can go place them in real hardware security modules. And we also have support coming online pretty soon where this can be hooked up with your on-premise hardware security modules as well if you want. So once you hook your on-premise environment, all your secrets and keys and certificates live on-premise, but even though you're running the VMs on the cloud, the certificates and the keys are fetched on the fly when you spin these VMs up. So we've brought richer security and capabilities with a new platform by integrating with Azure Key Vault. And it is also tightly coupled with Azure Active Directory, and who gets access to the keys, who can see the keys, we can use the keys. All of that can be defined as permissions in your Azure Active Directory with RBAC. So you can completely control, audit, and manage how these keys are being used in the platform. All right, I'll hand it back to Tobias to talk about RBAC.
Right, so we're going through some of the platform functionalities. Now let's focus on what Azure Resource Manager provides around RBAC, and we'll shortly talk about tags. So RBAC, role-based access control, it's like one of the hottest things that people asked for when public Azure didn't have it, like our top feature request. Now that we have it and we've implemented it in Azure Resource Manager, that comes down in Azure Stack in the exact same fashion. So the experience and the concepts that you're used to for configuring RBAC in public Azure will be the exact same concepts and experience for configuring RBAC in Azure Stack. And it allows today with public Azure for you to have granular permissions to resources and resource groups. And when you have your rules configured, they can be assigned to users, groups, or service principals. And service principals, similar concept as on-premises, is when you want to have RBAC, you want to have security around what a non-interactive account has access to. And we provide a bunch of roles in public Azure, like we will in Azure Stack, to get started with RBAC, so you're not looking at a blank screen in day 0 before you even can assign the first user. And for RBAC, there's two concepts. There's the definition of the role and the assignments of the role. So for the definitions of the role, this is the set of permissions that that role has. This can be read actions, write actions, delete actions, and then they can be used in multiple assignments. So you define that role once, just like in any traditional RBAC model, and you can assign it multiple times. So these role assignments, they're always at the scope of a resource group at a resource, and with a particular identity, that user, group, or service principal, and they're inherited, and we'll show that with this picture here. So in public Azure and in Azure Stack, we have this concept of a subscription. It's this overarching concept of where all the resource groups, where their resources are contained. And that same concept is in both public Azure and Azure Stack. So at your subscription level, you have these roles on the right, the contributors, the owners, the readers, and they flow downwards through the resource groups and the resources. So if you define RBAC on those resource groups, any of the resources that are inside of those resource groups automatically pick up those rules. And now resource tags are another concept that came with Azure Resource Manager. How many of you have used the tagging concept in Azure today? Wow. Like one person. Okay, so we're going to go through this pretty deeply. How many of you have used in Virtual Machine Manager custom properties? Okay, a lot more people. So to pivot to that, the tags are like custom properties in the sense you have these key value pairs, you have virtual machines that are deployed in Virtual Machine Manager, you're trying to keep track of them, you're trying to do cost center management, you're trying to figure out who the owners are. That's exactly the same functionality that we brought into Azure. And you can do searching and aggregating over these tags to see all the resources that are tagged with this particular key value pair. When you have these tags inside of your subscription, that taxonomy is available across the entire subscription. What that means is that when you have department with a particular value, all the resources across all the resource groups that have that same department finance, you'll be able to see, and they'll all be aggregated at the subscription level. Today in Azure, we support each resource and resource group having up to 15 tags. And the biggest benefit of once you've done this tags, especially for on-premises, when you have these chargeback-like scenarios where you're trying to keep track of where all the costs are flowing on your infrastructure, is that these tags flow down into the billing system. And we could show that how this works in public Azure today. And if you're not really sure, it's like the key value pairs, just some examples. Department would be the key or the name of the tag, and the value would be engineering environment QA, and the creator is myself. So we're going to hop into a demo real quick of how you use RBAC and tagging in Azure. Is the right screen? Yep. Great. So you'll see in this first account, Mahesh is logged in, and he's brand new, so he doesn't have access to anything, absolutely anything, so no resource groups. So as another version of Mahesh, we will go and grant the first Mahesh access to a particular resource group. So we're going to dive into a resource group here, and we'll just pick any old resource group. This one looks great. So go ahead and go into configuring the users. And again, the same experience consistent on premises. We'll go ahead and grant him reader access. Because he's new, I don't really trust him that much. There we go. So we're going to go ahead and grant access to that particular account. And we're going to hit OK. So that's going to go ahead and apply those rules. That was it for RBAC, and it's done. So let's go ahead and go back to that original view and refresh so we can pick up the new resource groups that he now has access to. We take a look at this part, and he's gotten access to this resource group. And I realized I don't really trust him that much. You can see the resource group, you see what's inside of it. But notice that because I only granted him reader access, he doesn't have the delete command at the top because I granted him only reader access to this resource group. Realized I don't trust him that much, so I'm going to go ahead and select him and remove him from the resource group. And by the time you go ahead and refresh that again, you'll see that he doesn't have access to that resource group anymore. Here, there we go, access denied. So now let's go into Azure Stack. And again, that same concept exists on premises with the exact same experience. And we just want to highlight that for you really quickly here. Let's get this guy loaded up. So you see that this version of Mahesh, again, has access to nothing. So we're going to go to Mahesh's alter ego and grant the other Mahesh access to this resource group that I created earlier. Note that since this guy is the administrator, he has access to add things to it, to configure it, but we're going to go ahead and hop into this view here, hopefully. Great. So we're going to go ahead and grant reader access like before. We're going to look for Mahesh. Oops. That was it?
Yep.
Select the user. Select OK. Exact same experience, exact same backend. So if we go ahead and take a look at the other view, logs back into the portal. Bam. So access to the resource group, no problems at all, but reader access only. This is running in Azure Stack. Remember, again, no delete, no modify, create permissions in this resource group. So something that, that we also talked about were the tags. So if we hop back out into the public Azure view for tags, right next to where we're configuring for this particular resource group, the access control, we also have this icon here. It's also under all settings for configuring tags. Hold on, sorry. No tags.
Give it a second.
Let's try a different resource here.
One second. Yeah, I think it takes a minute to load.
Okay. Maybe a lot of tags. Oh,
Yep.
There's a ton of tags in his environment, and I'm very impatient. So like we were talking about before, you have department, and remember that global scope across the subscription, the entire taxonomy is available, so you can use this to view globally everything that's going across all your subscriptions. And department, I'm just going to put finance in here. I'm going to go ahead and save that tag, have it added back. We're going to go ahead and add an owner, say Mahesh. And then once you have those tags in there, and you can keep adding them up to 15 tags, you'll be able to view the other resources that have that same key value pair inside of this view, so you have that global view across everything that's going across your subscriptions. And again, that same tagging experience is available on premises. You see that the tags here, there's no tags on this resource. You'll be able to add them and get the same view here. And the last bit about tagging is so important to keep track of billing. You can also see that this is a view of a bill from public Azure, and those tags, remember, flow down into your bill, so you can see them here. And over this data, you can do interesting things like get a Power Pivot table going to view where your costs are landing with the various tags that you've configured for your subscription.
And the interesting thing here is also that we're partnering with a lot of third-party providers like Cloud Cruiser, Cloud-In, and make sure that these capabilities that are there, if you're partnering with any of these people, you can actually go work with them as well. And Azure will ensure that these tags can actually be integrated into their platforms. So you can do cost management using any of these third-party providers. You can do them by yourself, but you can also integrate with all of these third-party providers to get tagging capabilities as well. Can you, we'll take the questions in the end. I couldn't hear you. Let's take the questions again in the end for 5 minutes. Yep. All right. All right, quickly, so let's spend a few minutes. I want to talk about complex application templates. This is a 300-level session. So we talked about a simple VM, then we talked about how do you go spin up 40 VMs. Now let's talk about how you do real application templates using this model. The way you think about, when you think about templates and architecting them or building them, you'd have to think about it in two ways. One, how do I build up my infrastructure for deploying this app? So think about the infrastructure. What is the orchestration that needs to be done for the infrastructure? The second part of that is configuring the application in a highly available fashion. So you have the guest configuration or in-VM configuration that needs to be done to make sure the app is configured, installed, ready to go. So from an infrastructure standpoint, architecting templates, think about the different environments, dev, test, prod. Make sure you have different templates or use the same template with different values. For example, in a dev environment, you could choose to have the value as 1. In a test environment, you could choose to have the value as 4. But in a production environment, when you're handling more traffic, you can do 20, right? So just by using the same template file with different parameters, you can ensure that you're targeting the different environments. So you build a single template file, but then you're targeting all the different environments where you're doing dev and test, right? We offer infrastructure orchestration. We saw a sample of that across compute, network, and storage. It doesn't stop there. Any other app service that is supported on both Azure and Azure Stack will be supported as well. That means if you have websites or SQL databases, you can actually go express them in the same template file and even express dependencies between those resources, right? So you get not just the capability for any compute, network, and storage, but you also get it for all other Azure services. And from a guest configuration standpoint, we kind of touched a little bit about that. We get PowerShell, DSC, Chef, Puppet, any Python, Perl scripts. Tavares kind of hates them, but so you can go do any of this. And from a custom extension standpoint, in the same template file, you can go place, use the anti-malware installation or a diagnostics agent installation. So we have the extension platform to go configure all of this from a single template file. Okay, let me go. Hopefully I won't scare you guys. Okay, let's start from the JSON outline. What you're seeing here on the left is a very rich, complicated template that allows you to deploy a SharePoint form in a single click. So you have 37 resources that takes it to go deploy a 9 VM SharePoint form. You can do this in a single click. So we have this ready to go for you guys, and we'll talk about how you can take this and go deploy. But we have this template which you can just go deploy a SharePoint form in a HA configuration from a single click. And if you thought about how to do this before, or if you had to do this before, we actually published like a 3,500 line PowerShell script that passes about 60% of the time. Right? So this is the biggest advantage of introducing these template files. You get this template file where you can just go specify the values or take them back to your own data center or your own box, modify the things that you need, and you can go do this in a single click. Right? So let's go look at, I'm going to go ahead and even deploy this right from here. At a high level, what this does is it's a very similar model. I have parameters, I have variables, I have the resources section, but I go use my storage accounts, I set up all my networking configuration, and then deploy the VM, right? I want to spend a little bit of time on one critical aspect here. You can search. Okay, so the one aspect that I wanted to talk about in a complex application template here is the template linking. If you look at the template link there, I'm referring to another template. What we're trying to do here is we have this model in Azure Resource Manager where you can have a base template defined. The base template could be a single VM. Right? And you can do template links where you can call the template link again and again. So if you have like 10 VMs that you want to spin up and you have one configuration, you have the model where you can use copy, or you can use a template linking capability to reference other templates. It's more like functions, if you will. So you have a function which is a template file, and then you can call it from your master template. So you have a master template which calls into a bunch of these secondary templates to go and deploy an app. So we have some rich capabilities to go do some real complicated application deployments on Azure. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy right here from Visual Studio. So Visual Studio supports that. It's going to go sign into my subscription. And the good part is if you look at it, there's also a parameters file, and we keep talking about it a lot. You can have different parameter files for the same template file. So you can target a dev environment or a test environment. So the only thing different between the repeatable deployments is probably your parameters file, right? Okay. So I'm going to go create a new resource group. SharePoint go ahead and create it in East Asia. Go ahead, create this. So right from Visual Studio, I'm creating the resource group as well. And this is the rich part about the client tooling that we're working on. Right? I pick the master template where I have everything. And right from Visual Studio, I can go edit all the parameters file that I want. So remember the default values that you had configured, it automatically loads it up. I'm going to go, this is pre-configured with a set of things that are already there. I'm going to go save it and just say deploy. And it's going to start deploying this. Now, another key part about this is when you use Visual Studio, it actually uses PowerShell at the back end for going and deploying this. So the script that is used to go deploy the entire resource group is available for you. So you don't have to go reconstruct this entire thing. You can take this PowerShell script, don't even have to use Visual Studio. Take this PowerShell script, save it offline, and go deploy the same template files again. So we also offer you the scripts that we are using at the back end to go deploy them, so you can use them, reuse them again and again as well. So as you can see, the different resources are being provisioned. And SharePoint Farm is a long deployment. I'm not going to hold you guys for another 2 hours to go deploy this, but let me go ahead and show you a pre-configured or pre-deployed SharePoint Farm that I have. So this is the other SharePoint Farm that I had deployed, and as you can see, I have about 31 resources in this deployment, and if I navigate back up, you can see all the 9 different VMs that I have in my deployment. It's configuring Active Directory in HA format, so I have a primary DC and a secondary DC. I have SQL Server always on configured, so I have SQL primary and secondary. I have a witness VM for the configuring the cluster availability in a SQL always on model. I have 2 VMs for my application tier. I have 2 VMs for my web tier. So I use this simple template file and just go ahead and deploy it. It's going to configure the entire SharePoint form right for you. Now, let's go ahead and look at and log into one of the SharePoint forms. So here's the web IP address, right? I'm going to go zoom in here a little bit and look at this SharePoint form link or the DNS name, right? Let's go back up here. That SharePoint form is right here. So you have the SharePoint form that can come back up in a single click right here. Just go click and upload a bunch of files. Look at these files. Let's go load the SharePoint form up again. So from a single click, you are able to get such complicated application deployments in a very easy fashion. That's kind of the big value prop going forward.
All right, thanks, Mahesh. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. But before we do, we want to tell you how you can start using some of the stuff that you've seen today. Now, I said earlier that you could start using Azure Stack today. What I mean by that is you could start using Azure Stack in public Azure today because it's consistent and it's the same stuff. Yes, I got to laugh. So Azure Stack Preview, yeah, those actual bits, they will be coming later this year. And Azure Stack RTM will be available next year. Again, if you want to learn more about Azure Stack, we've got a really simple link for you, aka.ms/Azure Stack, and you can start using it in public Azure today and sign up for a free trial if you're not already using an MSDN subscription with EA credits. Some other links you can take a look at when you get access to this presentation. We have sample templates to start using against public Azure. They're written by Microsoft employees and third parties, and there's also a list of related sessions about Azure Stack. Thanks, you guys, for coming, and don't forget to review.
Thank you.